Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final installment in this spring's Book Sandwiched In series. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Rebecca Harrison, and I'm the manager of adult services at Central Library. And I am so excited to have been able to help out this spring by introducing our wonderful lineup of speakers. Big thank you to the Friends of the Tulsa City-County Libraries for sponsoring today's program. If you'd like more information about how to become a friend of the library, visit tulsalibrary.org/friends. If you have any questions throughout today's program, please feel free to put those in the chat. Our speaker will answer audience questions following his presentation. And now I'd like to welcome today's presenter. Sloan Davis is an associate professor of English at Tulsa Community College. He received his BA in English from the State University of New York at Albany, an MA in Literature from the University of Tulsa, where he was a Perriott Fellow, and an MFA in Creative Writing from Wichita State, where he received an MFA Fellow in Fiction. Along with a partner, he writes and produces films. Their latest project, Lonely Hunter, the first of a series of short films, was showcased recently in the Red Dirt Film Festival and the 74th University Film and Video Conference. Sloan also writes and performs stories. He has performed live at OKSO of Tulsa numerous times, and he has had fiction and poetry published in Barnstorm, the Wisconsin Review, Nebo, the Tulsa Review, the Aroostook Review, and other literary journals. He is a singer-songwriter for the band Your Drunken Uncle. He travels often and gives tours of Ireland. Please join me in warmly welcoming Sloan.
Hi, thank you. What a great intro. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this spring day. The weather has changed and my allergies are up, so if I sneeze, I apologize. So we are going to dive into William Kent Krueger's This Tender Land, an epic novel. And I wish I knew through a show of hands how many have read this or who are planning to read this. Having finished it, I plan on reading it again. It's a really great Americana epic of wonderful proportions. And I'm just very thankful that I had the opportunity to read it. I don't know if I would have had I not been asked to present. It says at the top here, if you liked Where the Crawdads Sing, you'll love This Tender Land. I did not read Where the Crawdads Sing, but now I'm gonna go back and read it because of this book. So I'm going to share my screen now and we'll dive into this PowerPoint and get into the details of the novel. Sorry, Zoom is a little frustrating at times. Here we go. So for the most part, I am not going to offer any spoilers because I'm afraid of that. I am one who really despises spoilers, and I don't want to know the ending for sure before I read something. So there we go. So I'm going to try to avoid that. At the end of the PowerPoint, I do have a little like stop sign that I'm going to want to talk about some of the stuff for anyone who's read it and might want to have this conversation about critiquing the novel. So at that point, I might ask you, if you haven't read it, to mute the presentation for a few minutes, and then we'll unmute and come back to the Q&A. Okay, so let me get us started here. Always like to start off with a little bit of bio background on the author. William Kent Krueger, he was born November 16th, 1950 in Wyoming. He attended Stanford University, but did not graduate. If you look down below, you'll see here that he ran into some trouble with the administration for the protests of the Vietnam War in 1970, which made me like him even more as an author. He's won, several awards: Anthony Awards Best Novel twice, Anthony Awards Best First Novel, and the Loft McKnight Award, besides others. And he currently lives in St. Paul, which is what he calls home. He said when he and his wife discovered Minnesota, they knew that they had found home. And the novel mostly takes place in Minnesota. So he's fully aware of location. And one thing that I will get into in this presentation is setting. I think, you know, some authors use setting deeper than others, and I think Krueger does a fantastic job of weaving the world through details and tone for us to witness Minnesota in 1932. One thing about Krueger that I like, he says, for this tender land, Krueger walked a lot of the land he thought his main characters might have walked. But for this book, he had to create a period of time that no longer exists and situations he has not experienced. For example, the Indian trading school and the Hooverville shanty towns he described no longer exist. So he had to rely on extreme research, and he did thorough research for this. He says, I tried to come up with specific telling details, and then I just imagined. There is a seed of truth in every story, and then the story grows. I tried to put as many seeds of truth in as I could, but it is just a story, he reminds us. He said he always walks over the land he writes about, whether for his novels or for the 18 Cork O'Connor books he has written, which I think finished in 2013. He says, I don't know how you can write about a place if you've not experienced it. There is so much that is sensual and that you need to create movingly for a reader. If you haven't seen the color of a river, or smelled the river, or heard the sounds of a tree frog, or watched the reflection of a bird across the river, how can you write about that? So I kayaked the river and walked the places Odie, the story's narrator, walked. I climbed the hills. And that research that I did on him and his process really opened up the book for me even more so because of how much he invested in the process of the writing, not just doing the historical research on the Great Depression, on the horrible forced acclimation of Native Americans in those Indian schools, but just walking the land, kayaking the river, knowing the setting. And if you haven't read this, you're going to find yourself into a deep dive of details about Minnesota in the time frame that it was, and on this great journey down the Gilead, which I'll get into, heading towards Mississippi, St. Paul, and then eventually St. Louis. It's quite the journey, and setting is not only vitally important, it affects plot, it affects character, but it is a character. It is a character in the novel. You feel it as the children experience it. Okay, so let me click on here, and you know, I'm new to these idea of book trailers, but I think I love them. I think they're wonderful. Movies have trailers, you know, books maybe should have trailers as well. And so I found this on his website. It's only 2 minutes long, so I'd like to play it for you because I think hearing from the author is a fantastic way, an entry point, if you will, to the novel. And this is high quality, so I put this in here. So let's listen to him.
The tale I'm going to tell is of a summer long ago, of killing and kidnapping and children pursued by demons of 1,000 names. There will be courage in this story and cowardice. There will be love and betrayal. And of course, there will be hope. In the end, isn't that what every good story is about? This tender land is set in the summer of 1932, deep in the Great Depression. It's the story of 4 orphans running from the law because they've committed a terrible crime, but for the right reason. The narrator of the story is a young man named Odie O'Banion. He's 12 years old, going on 13. His older brother, Albert, is his protector, his guardian. And one of the companions is Mose, a Native American boy who is mute. And there is Emmy, who joins the vagabonds much to their reluctance. And their plan is to canoe all the way down the Mississippi to St. Louis, where they believe they have family and they'll be safe. I have always wanted to write an updated version of Huckleberry Finn. This is my Huckleberry Finn. I wanted these kids to be on some sort of a journey, but I didn't know what kind. And then I thought about Homer and the Odyssey. And so I began thinking of this story in terms of the kinds of experiences that Odysseus had as he returned to Ithaca from Troy. Although this tender land begins as a story of desperation, in their journey down the river, the four vagabonds discover that the world is far richer, more complex, and a great deal more astonishing than they could ever have imagined. It's really a story about discovering ourselves, and the rivers in this story serve as a metaphor for our journey through life and all we discover about ourselves and others in the world on that journey. I would like this to be a book that readers find a place for in their hearts and want to read again and again and again.
Okay, so, oops, sorry. I think that the book trailer is really well done, and the visuals are great. You can sort of get a sense of the setting. The harmonica playing in the background is a huge element, motif that runs through the novel as Odie, the protagonist and narrator, plays the harmonica. It is a vehicle for connection through characters, from Odie to Sister Eve and so many others, to Emmy. He plays this harmonica, and it's his way of reaching people, besides his storytelling, which I'll get into. So let's move on from this, and we'll go here and we'll talk about what he referenced, right? He referenced Huckleberry Finn, he referenced the Odyssey, but actually, as I see it, I see this tender land as part Huckleberry Finn, part Grapes of Wrath, part Oliver Twist, and then of course a big dose of the Odyssey, which he is not shy about. It's clear that the Odyssey plays a role here. Obviously, he says in his own voice that Huckleberry Finn, it's a river story, as is Huckleberry Finn. And so there are certain elements of Huck Finn that are absolutely in this as well. And I'm going to break it into, when I get into character and setting and theme, I will sort of show how these literary references sort of play out a little bit in the novel, and I won't give them all away. But the Star Tribune says, this is a picturesque tale of adventure during the Great Depression, part Grapes of Wrath, part Huckleberry Finn. Krueger's novel is a journey over inner and outer terrain toward wisdom and freedom. We see the cruelty and abuse of Indian boarding schools. We see Hoovervilles and shantytowns, farmlands and meandering rivers, rocky bluffs and flooded river flats. We see poisonous snakes and tent revivals, manhunts, bread lines, soup kitchens. Always there is danger. Always there is the threat of capture. And if you hadn't read the book and you read that paragraph, I don't know how you don't read the book. That's quite the setup there. So so with these great historical novels in mind and the epic poem, the Odyssey, let's get into this a little bit. On this slide, I broke down many themes, but notice at the bottom it says etc. themes and motifs, because I could have put maybe 5 slides of theme and motifs used in this novel. This novel is 450 pages, and it covers a lot of terrain, both internally, character-wise, and externally on the trip. But certainly number 1 jumps out is family and home, and this notion of what is home. And what I like about Krueger's writing is he really sort of explores that notion of family and home, and how it's not, family and home are not always what we think family and home are, right? That it can be so many different locations and different people in our lives, and it doesn't always fall into the nuclear family in the suburbs, if you follow me. And then of course, our young narrator Odie, there's a sense of identity And this goes with the Native American character Mose. Everyone, sort of, these young characters are in search of who they are. The idea of faith or lack thereof. Odie talks about the tornado god, which is reflective of Poseidon in the Odyssey, sort of chasing after him as he's on his trail. Well, that's exactly what happens in the Odyssey with Odysseus and Poseidon, right? Poseidon is chasing Odysseus as he tries to get home to Ithaca. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see them. Some of them, literally, Krueger mentions in his prologue about courage and cowardice and love and betrayal. But some of the motifs are also interesting. This is absolutely a hero's journey in the sense of Odysseus. And then our young protagonist is a storyteller. He's a natural born storyteller, and he tells stories. They're often fantasy stories to entertain his fellow orphans and escapees. And then, as I mentioned, music. He carries a harmonica in his pocket. And unfortunately, I didn't learn any of the songs. I was trying, but I didn't. I played a little harmonica. But he plays a lot of great American traditional folk music throughout the story. And some of it's very touching to people. And a lot of other people join in with the music. So it brings people together. It harkens to past troubles and strife and things like that. And it's throughout the entire narrative, so it's really well done. And then I'm surprised at the spirituality and mysticism that Krueger takes us along with some of his characters. And I almost wanted to say magical realism, but we don't maybe fully get there, but it is quite stunning. And then the Americana. I mean, this is as American as it gets in the sense of our history as a country, the various characters, how people are treated, how people treat each other in the past, what they went through with the Great Depression, etc. It just feels like a giant slice of American apple pie, good, bad, and the ugly, all thrown in this epic journey. So let's go into characters. Characters. Look at this list of characters. These I put up the end and so many more because I couldn't list them all. It's a massive book and it's a fun book and there's so many interesting characters to read about. But the vagabonds, and that's Odie's description of them in his storytelling when he tells them stories. The stories he tells are often reflective of the four of them. They're on the run. They're all orphans from different backgrounds. You have Odie O'Banion. Odie stands for Odysseus. It's a short for Odysseus, so you can see the connection there. His narration, he's the narrator and the protagonist. And he's both, in the prologue, you find that he's a very old man. And then we get some of the narrative as a young Odie in the main storyline. Albert's his older brother, as we learned. He's a gifted engineer. He can fix almost anything mechanical. He's also the protector of Odie and pretty much of everybody in the group. Mose, who's also his Sioux name is Amdaka, is this incredibly hard worker. He's also a gifted baseball player. And then Emmy's this little girl about the age of 6, I believe. And she has a gift. She has a gift of sightseeing that plays throughout the novel. And she's sort of the conscious of the group. She has this innocence about her that allows her to sort of maybe see things clearly that others might not see in the moment. So she's maybe the moral compass at times. And then there's many others, but we need to go through these. Thelma Brickman is the Black Witch, and this ties into setting, but one thing that I really appreciate with his storytelling, Krueger's storytelling, is that he takes his time. So the Black Witch is not in the novel for the majority of it, but she's in the novel at certain crucial times, the beginning and at the end. And she is the antagonist, the overall antagonist. There are several antagonists, but she is the evil, if you will, Black Witch hunting the kids. I mean, she's threaded throughout the narrative, but she really plays a major role in the beginning, is because she runs this Indian trading school that they are all sort of forced to be to attend, and we take our time with her there, and we learn how dark her heart is, and I think that's very important, because I think other writers might have said, okay, I want to write this great journey novel, and we're going to start here in Lincoln, Minnesota, at this school, and we're only gonna spend like one chapter, and then we're gonna take off. And he spends several chapters there, and he really builds sympathy for his young orphans, right? We feel for them, and it's dark. There's some darkness to this novel for sure. I'll get into that as we go along. Clyde is her toady husband. I'm not gonna get into that. Cora Frost is Emmy's mom. As I said earlier, she's an orphan too, so you can imagine what can happen. And then I'm not going to get into every one of these, but I do love like some of these characters. One-Eyed Jack is absolutely the Cyclops from Odysseus. Forrest is this great Sioux Indian guide, if you will, especially for Mose. Sister Eve and the Sword of Gideon Healing Crusade. They are like this motley crew, and they could be from almost any of the novels that are sort of the guiding reference point for Krueger's writing. But then you get the Schofields on the river. They're in a Hooverville camp, and they are absolutely grapes of wrath characters. It's quite clear. When we get to the flats of St. Paul, the West Side Flats characters, Gertie and Flo and True, and Calvin and Kelly, they reminded me of Oliver Twist characters in London, and how they were second-class citizens and sort of treated horribly by the police and the government. And then of course there's Aunt Julie and the ladies at the end, which I will get to later. So setting, as I said, is vital to this story. Checking my time here. So it starts out the Lincoln Indian Trading School, and this notion of kill the Indian and save the man that Richard Pratt stated long ago in the 1800s is sort of the idea behind this. Odie and Albert are I think they're the only white kids at this school. Emmy is really not really part of the school, but she's associated to it because of her mother. And these are the photos that I took off of Krueger's website. It shows you the research he did on this. It's quite powerful stuff, and it shows you the dark side of history and setting in America that this novel doesn't hide from. This was wonderful. I love doing the research on this. You can see, so the Gilead is not a real river. It's a make-believe river that he created for the novel. It has biblical overtones because it's mentioned in the Bible about the Jordan River and the ideas of what is it, Laban, is it? Or Jacob flees with his father-in-law Laban. I'm looking at my notes here. In Genesis, and they're on the run too, right? So it has a metaphorical significance as well. But you can see, if you look at this map here, you can see that it starts at Big Stone Lake. So the Gilead is the Minnesota, if you will. It's the tribute of the Minnesota, but it is the Minnesota. I've looked and looked and looked. And it's like, okay, this is the Minnesota River, which flows into Mississippi. And this is the track they take right through here. So you can see this blue part right here. It's basically Southwest Minnesota. It gets to Mankato, excuse me, I can't see my own thing. Mankato, I can't say it. And then goes over to St. Paul and into the Mississippi. It's quite a journey on canoe, especially for young kids. Emmy's 6, Odie is 12, Albert and Mose, I think, are 13 or 14. They're just barely older than Odie. So it's quite the journey and dangerous journey they take. Did I read this? I wanted to read this really quick about this journey. All All right, so it says, canoeing the Mississippi River, the children ages 6 to 16 end up on a journey of discovery, each searching for something different. That includes Mose, a Sioux boy who doesn't speak because his tongue was cut out when he was 4 years old. I forgot to mention, yes, he signs everything, and other characters can sign with him. His journey is a journey in terms of his relationships to his past and the past of his people. And that's a good segue for this next slide, which this is a map in the novel, but where hang 38 Sioux Indian is a plaque that plays a role in the novel. This does not exist anymore, but someone had taken a photo of it. It once was there. So his research is true. Krueger does a great job of mixing historical truth with fiction, so it feels authentic. And this is part of Mose's journey of identifying as Sioux, feeling the pain of the past, of how his people were treated, and it's powerful stuff. And on some level, you know, Huck Finn had Jim. This to New Land has Mose as this character who was absolutely mistreated. And then more on setting here, the Great Depression era, the flats of St. Paul. The photos here in the circles are the flats. I was able to find these off Google, but they show the flooding, which plays a major role, or at least the historical reference to the flats and the horrible sort of circumstances they find themselves, especially during the Great Depression. Of course, this famous photo of the Great Depression, the mother and her children, and then these are Hoovervilles, which also is a major part of their journey. Setting, like I said, is a character in this novel. It is a historical character in this novel. Some people ask if this is a historical novel. Is it historical fiction? There's a controversy or an argument happening right now about that. The author himself kind of laughs at the notion that it's a historical novel. And that's the question I had earlier on the slide. Like, if it's set in time in the past in a certain era, like the Great Depression, does that automatically make it a historical work of fiction? There's debate, right? Sometimes you have to have historical characters in that fiction, right? So I don't know. All the other characters are invented. All the characters in this are invented. So that's a good debate to have. I don't know. I don't have time. I was going to go into a critique about the ending. I do have some questions. I do have some maybe parts about the novel that I find might be brushed over. There's some questions I have about the author getting in his own way with certain things, but I don't have time because we're almost to 12:40. So I want to open it up now to Q&A. And I'll share this PowerPoint with anybody. I have links to all my research, and I have links to his website, which is quite professionally well done. But I'm going to stop sharing and hand it back to Rebecca.
Thank you, Sloan. So while we're waiting for questions in the chat, I'll go ahead and ask a question. I was looking at reviews for this book and noticed that it had been compared favorably to Where the Crawdads Sing, right, which is a huge bestseller from recent years. Have you read that book by any chance?
No, I mentioned this at the beginning. I had heard about it and I'd wanted to read it, but I was so busy at the time when it came out and everyone was talking about it. And then of course, I read this, I see the comparison, and now I'm compelled. I have to go back and read that novel. Plus I love the title, right? I mean, yeah, the title. So I will. And you know, I mean, there's a lot of great Americana novels, but I'm glad they're kind of coming out right now with some good ones, these different authors.
You did mention that you had some critiques about the ending. Did you want to touch on what some of those were?
Well, I'm concerned about spoilers, but I will. I think there are parts in the novel where he's a little heavy, right? He's a little heavy with his, and this is me going through grad school and doing all the things and writing all those literary criticisms I had to write and reading all of that great literature as you go through it. The one thing that, you know, a lot of great authors do is they do these subtle references or metaphors or whatever to other sources, other works of literature, and you have to really dig to sort of find it, right? I think Krueger is heavy-handed at times. He's very open about it. Sometimes it's refreshing, and I'm like, look, I don't think this is really written to be this, you know, heavy literary work. This is meant to be very accessible and very fun. You know, this is just a fun read, which it is. But there are things like, so all the kids have nicknames. Odie is Buck Jones, the actor at the time. Albert's is Norman, and this is a really good example. He doesn't even, this moment in the novel when Albert reveals that his name is going to be Norman, is he's not boy or man, right? Norman. And that's a direct link to Odysseus and the Cyclops when they say, who's blinded me? And he says, no man. And that whole scene in the Odyssey. And it's just very kind of, feels a little heavy-handed there. And then I think he explains, he does some telling about writing. In both the prologue and epilogue, he sort of, I don't want to say he's making excuses, but it feels a little like that. That's what I was saying with critiques. Like, it just feels like he gets in his way a little bit. Like, I'm okay with not knowing all, like he says, some of it's true and some of it, well, let's just say it's the bloom on the rose bush. And I'm like, I don't need to know that. I want to enjoy the fantasy of this being the thing. You know what I mean? Like, this is a wonderful story. And I feel like that little bit of telling sometimes gets in the way. That's all. I'm suggesting read the book, clearly.
Yeah, right. It doesn't take a significant amount of enjoyment away from the experience.
Yeah.
As an English major, I majored in English, and you know, a lot of what we did in class was literary analysis and kind of dissecting the book the way you talked about. This is just a general question for you. Do you ever find that tendency that is ingrained in us as English majors ever takes away from your enjoyment of a book? Are you still able to lose yourself in the book without your, you know, professor brain kicking in?
Yeah, good point. Yes and no is the answer. I did with this book. I found myself, especially at some point, I was so into it, I didn't stop reading. I mean, it was chunks of 100 pages at a time, easy. And when I finished, you see all these tabs. Well, that's after I finished. I had to go back and I'm like, oh, I forgot to make notes. I mean, I wrote in the margins, of course, because that's training as well that you learn in school, but I forgot to really say, okay, this is my talking points for this presentation, because I was so into it. I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed the journey. There were, again, the critic comes out at me when I get snapped out of the illusion of being in the story, right? So whenever there's a moment that is that takes me out of that magic, is when my critical part comes in, because it's, you know, I have to get back in, right? I have to get back into that narrative magic. And so that for me, yeah, it's a back and forth, but I also love it, right? I also love being able to read a book and seeing the layers, right? So seeing the influence of the Odyssey and all these other works that I've read numerous times. I love Huck Finn. I think it's one of the greatest American novels ever written. And to see the connections and to see the Grapes of Wrath, and I love that book too. It's like, okay, fantastic, you know? So that's actually enriches my reading, I think.
Yeah, I could see that, but it's also a compliment to the book and the author that you were able to get lost and not even realize that you should be taking notes. Yeah. So that's awesome. We did have a comment in the chat. I've seen several interviews with Krueger. He's always warm and engaging. I could then see that warmth in his writing. He is also kind enough to meet with book clubs via Zoom, and will be meeting with a Friends book club in Tulsa this summer.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, and he also writes like longhand in my research. He writes, and what diner is it? It's the St. Clair Broiler, and he gets there at like 5:30 in the morning, and he writes longhand. He has his own table. They have it all set up for him. And he's very thankful and reflective about what that means to him. He puts it right in the book, in fact. He says, you know, acknowledgements, and he acknowledges the waitstaff and owners of that diner for letting him have his space to write and do research. So very engaging author. Sweet man, too. He comes across very kind. I watched some videos of him in book clubs, and he's a huge supporter of it. Obviously, it helps him professionally, but I think he's engaged. I think he truly loves what he does. It comes across in his writing and his interviews.
Very cool. I have another question in the chat. As they say, the Odyssey has been so done by the Coen brothers and others. Do you feel that Krueger added something interesting to his take on it?
Okay, yeah, really good connection, whoever asked that question about the Coen brothers, because they got there first in the sense of the Odyssey and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, right? In the sense of the Depression and that era. Does he offer anything brand new? I would say a little bit, yeah. Again, some of it's just very, it feels a little heavy-handed to me. Like the Odie is the name of the main character, right? And it stands short for Odysseus, and that's a little heavy-handed to me. But one thing that I really liked was the Flats, which is something I didn't even know about. St. Paul's West Side Flats, which is a real location, which really did struggle with flooding from the Mississippi and was basically shanty towns that held a lot of minorities. And it's really interesting too, how he dives into the Irish and the Jewish population, the Irish Copts and the Jewish poor population of the Flats, which again, the Flat characters remind me of Fagin and the London characters and Oliver Twist. But to get back to the question, the Flats are, which was nice, and I kind of brushed over it when I read it, and then I had to go back when I was really deep diving and thinking about it. They are the, what was it, the Lotus Eaters, the Isle of the Lotus Eaters, right? So that was refreshing to me because the kids sort of forget what the journey they're on because they get fed, you know, they're hungry and they get fed in the Flats and they meet these great characters and they get it. So that was light-handed and by Krueger, and I really appreciated that. So yeah, I would say the answer is some to that question.
So did the book explicitly say that Odie was short for Odysseus? And if so, did they explain why he was named that?
Yes, it does, but I'm not going to tell you why.
Okay.
The novel, and by the way, if you haven't read the novel, there are some great reveals, great twists at the end that feel authentic. Again, some of it can be a little heavy-handed, but for the most part, it was fun. It was fun to the end. The epilogue, you got to read the epilogue. It's all good. It's all very good.
Well, that was the last question that we had in the chat. Do you have any other comments you'd like to make about the book before we wrap up?
I would just highly suggest you read it. It's going to be a great summer read if you haven't. It's one of those where you might want to just pour yourself an ice cold iced tea or lemonade, sit on the porch or deck of your house or wherever you find a spot and just dive in, and it will take you away. I will say this, I hope they don't make a movie of this. It's too big for a movie. They need to follow the long form. And this is, by the way, the best stuff we have right now anyway, for the adaptation of novels is the long form. And I mean, i.e. series, right?
Like miniseries.
Miniseries. This probably wouldn't be, this might be a one series, like that's it. Maybe 10 episodes or 6 episodes since it's broken into 6 parts, the novel. Put it on Netflix, put it on HBO, but I hope they don't cheat the novel and try to make it into a movie because they will have to cut so much. In fact, they could probably do a 12-part series because it's so important to sort of feel the setting, to go down that river with those characters is the beauty of this novel. And there's a certain flow with the river that the novel, the narrative takes, right? That is truly enjoyable. It's not rushed for the most part. There are some moments where I think oh, they had a fight, and he kind of gives me summary instead of showing me the fight. I'm like, I wanted to see that. But for the most part, it just flows. The narrative flows with the river currents, and it's really well done.
Really have enjoyed this turn to like long form ways of telling stories. Like the streaming platforms, I feel like have really opened that up, and you really get to know the characters and experience them more fully than you do sometimes in like a 2-hour movie. So it sounds like this book would be perfect for that.
Yeah, a great example is The Handmaid's Tale, which connects to this novel in a weird way because of the Gilead. But I've taught that book many times, and the movie adaptation, and the long form narrative on Hulu is so much better. It's so much more connected to the novel. We get those little beats that the novel follows with those details that the movie doesn't have time for, right?
It does sometimes do a disservice to the source text when it's adapted to this big screen. The Queen's Gambit comes to mind as another one that was adapted from a book, and I feel like the series was perfect.
I have to go back and read the book, but the series was fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm definitely intending to check out the book now.
You should.
I'm sure our attendees agree. And I also wanted to thank everyone for attending today's program. This is the last in the series, but we will be back in the fall. Huge thank you to the Friends of the Tulsa City-County Library for making the Book Sandwiched In series possible. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Sloan.